Martin, you've often spoken about what is it? Moving from fixing symptoms to fixing systems. In reality, what does that look like in day-to-day world and for organizations? What should they be doing? Because I think we have been talking a lot about the various aspects of psychosocial health and safety, but the cold hard reality is that businesses are out there trying to be successful. Many of them are working really hard to build high performing teams. But what does it mean to build effective systems?
Yeah, look, I'm a bit of a systems thinker. I like some of the systems thinking concepts, and I'm also a big fan of coaching. So I've been an executive coach for a long time. Um, so I try and blend a bit of systems thinking and a bit of sort of human centric coaching approaches to solutions. In Australia, New Zealand, the UK, the legislation is performance based, so it talks around managing hazards and risks. It doesn't tell you how to do things. So it's not legislation that says, if it's a working at heights issue, this is what you must do in a prescriptive way. It says that's a risk. There are risks associated with the job. Eliminate them or control them to a level that's reasonably practicable. So the regulators want to see some action to manage those risks. The higher the risk, the more action the regulator expects you to take. The same applies with the psychosocial safety as it does to physical safety. The regulator wants to see organizations understand which of those hazards relate to their work, that they've risk assessed them, and that they're putting some controls in place in consultation with the workers. If you can start that process, the regulator will be really happy. Certainly, the regulators I know in Australia and New Zealand, they're not expecting a Rolls Royce version of a system immediately. They know that it's a journey, and but they just want to see people start the journey. They want to see some action. So the legislation in Australia came in 2 years ago, and there's three or four states and territories over here now who are really active in the compliance space. And what I mean by that is New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, Queensland are actively knocking on the doors of business and saying, hey, we're here to talk around psychosocial safety. What are you doing about it? Where's your risk assessment? How are you identifying which of the hazards relate to your work? And what are you doing to control them? And so that's stimulated a bit of activity from businesses. It's not a level playing field, so the regulator will not expect every business to be doing the same thing. So if you own a small convenience store, then the regulator will expect you to start the process, but the controls might be fairly minimal. But if you're a multinational mining company, then they'll expect you to invest a significant amount of time and effort and money into that. So, and some of those hazards are pretty significant. So, like one of the hazards, for example, is workplace harassment and violence and aggression. So, and that includes sexual harassment, violence, and aggression, and sort of gender-related biases. So, organisations should be looking at that as a psychosocial hazard. What are you doing around workplace sexual and physical violence, harassment, and aggression? And if you've got a policy, then that's great, but please don't make that the only thing you've got. Like, you've got to do something behind that. What are you doing to try and stop it? And that's where the controls start to come into play, because there should be some standards, some documents, some procedures, code of ethics, values, code of conduct, but there should also be some training for staff. There should also be some form of ability to ventilate issues. So things like whistleblower protection programs and hotlines where people can call up and raise issues, investigation processes. So the organization should have a process to investigate these things. Um, and ironically, there was some recent case law in Australia where the employment courts ruled that the HR investigation to deal with some of these psychosocial safety issues is not enough. So you can't just treat it as a HR issue, which is generally we're going to speak to parties, somebody gets disciplined or sacked, and away they go. There's got to be a more rigorous investigation program that incorporates things like procedural fairness, the ability for everyone to speak and hold account, effective decision making based on evidence, a trauma-informed, person-centric approach. So you need to think about who makes the complaint and who responds. And an example there I'll give you is I do a lot of work in the mining industry around the world. A lot of safety professionals in the mining industry tend to be middle-aged men, but now there's a lot more younger men and women coming into the workforce. We had a complaint by a 21-year-old female truck driver and around sexual harassment, and the person who interviewed her was a 55-year-old 6'3" male. Not appropriate. You've got to ask that individual how they want to be treated and spoken to. It's incredibly confronting and embarrassing for a 21-year-old female to explain how she was sexually harassed to a 55-year-old male. So it's those sorts of approaches. You've got to start thinking about how you treat those and how you deal with them as a business. It's not difficult, but there are some steps that you need to take, and it's understanding those steps. And I say to organizations, if you don't know what those steps are, or you're really scratching your head, there's a number of different places you can go for help, and it doesn't have to be expensive or time consuming. It can be fairly cheap and quick.